Alright guys, Dominic here for Kit Guru, and today is the day we can present our review of Nvidia's RTX 3070. Nvidia wasn't shy about making some big claims for this graphics card, saying it was going to be similar to, if not faster than, the RTX 2080 Ti, but at a price point of £469, so significantly cheaper than last generation's flagship. In this review, we are going to find out just how true that claim really is. Before we do that though, it's worth recapping some of the key specs of the 3070, as it's kind of flown a little bit under the radar since the announcement of the 30 series, or at least in comparison to the RTX 3080 and 3090. So with the 3070, one major difference is the fact that this uses the GA104 GPU instead of the GA102 GPU, which was used for both the 3080 and the 3090, though it is still fabbed on Samsung's 8nm process. GA104 comes with 46 streaming multiprocessors, or SMs, and there's 128 CUDA cores per SM, giving a total of 5,888. There's also 46 RT cores, 184 Tensor cores, and a total of 96 ROPs. Other key changes include the memory, so gone is Micron's GDDR6X, and instead we return to 8GB of regular GDDR6, and that's clocked at 14GB per second. Using a 256-bit memory interface, we get total memory bandwidth at 448GB per second. Lastly, total graphics power is rated at 220 watts for this Founders Edition model, and that's 45 watts higher than a reference RTX 2070. That's where I'm going to leave the introduction though guys, as I really do want to get on to our testing. All of our benchmarking today was done with our regular test system from PC Specialist, and that includes an Intel i9-10900K overclocked to 5.1 GHz across all cores. That is paired with the Asus ROG Maximus 12 Hero motherboard and 32GB of Corsair Vengeance DDR4 memory running at 3600 MHz. For the RTX 3070, Nvidia also provided press with the 456.96 driver. The absolute last thing I'm going to say before we get into the benchmarks is that in this video we are focusing on the 1440p and 4K data, but if you do want to see our 1080p results as well as all of the benchmarks, you can do so in the written review over on kitguru.net. With that said, let's get into the benchmarks. Our first game of the day then is Control, and this is actually the most demanding title in our test suite. At 1440p, the RTX 3070 averages 75 FPS, putting it just 1% behind the RTX 2080 Ti, but compared to the RTX 2070, it comes in a significant 56% faster. As for 4K, here the RTX 3070 holds above 30 FPS at all times, so it is certainly playable, but it's not the smoothest of experiences. It is, however, exactly a match for the 2080 Ti at this resolution, and holds a huge 65% lead over the RTX 2070 at 4K. Death Stranding runs like a charm on pretty much everything, and at 1440p, the RTX 3070 averages 133 FPS. This gives it a 2% lead over the 2080 Ti, and a handy 51% advantage when compared to the RTX 2070. 4K is no problem for the 3070 in this game either, with the 1% lows coming in just shy of the 70 FPS mark. In terms of average frame rates, the 3070 increases its marginal victory to 3% over the RTX 2080 Ti, while it is 57% faster than the 2070 at 4K. Now, in our RTX 3080 review, we noted how The Division 2 was the game that saw the single biggest performance increase for the 3080 when compared to the 2080, and the same applies here to the 3070. At 1440p, it comes in 67% faster than its RTX 2070 predecessor. Once we step up to 4K, the 3070 still maintains that 67% lead over the 2070 as it averages 55 FPS. This puts it exactly on par with the RTX 2080 Ti, with identical 1% lows as well. Moving on to Far Cry New Dawn, this game is heavily CPU limited, even at 1440p. There, the RTX 3070 outperforms the 2070 by 37%, and that's actually the smallest improvement at 1440p across all of the games we tested. Compared to the 2080 Ti, it is 3% slower in this title. As we step up to 4K though, we do become GPU limited, and the 3070 falls a little bit further behind the 2080 Ti, as it is now 5% slower. The lead over the 2070 has grown significantly, however, up from 37% at 1440p to 48% at 4K. Gears 5 is another game where the RTX 3070 does well. At 1440p, the GPU hits 100 FPS on average, which is a 64% improvement over the RTX 2070 and is even 5% faster than the RTX 2080 Ti. That last result is actually the biggest marginal victory we saw for the Ampere GPU compared to the 2080 Ti, so that definitely gives you an idea of how closely matched these two GPUs are. At 4K as well, the 2080 Ti does make up some ground, but the 3070 is still 2% faster at that resolution. It also holds a 63% advantage over the 2070. Next is Ghost Recon Breakpoint, and here the relative performance of the 3070 isn't quite so impressive as Gears 5. It's still 44% faster than the 2070 when testing at 1440p, but that is one of the smaller improvements we will see today. At 4K though, the margin does increase to 51%, which is a bit more like it. We can also see the 3070 effectively matching the 2080 Ti, as it is just one frame slower in terms of the average frame rate. Next up, we come to Metro Exodus, and this does paint a more positive picture for the 3070 than Ghost Recon Breakpoint. At 1440p, for instance, this new Ampere GPU outperforms the RTX 2070 by 58%, as it hits 134 FPS on average. This is still 3% slower than the 2080 Ti. As we step up to 4K, the 2080 Ti pulls slightly further ahead, not by a lot, but now the 3070 is 5% slower. Compared to the 2070, it is still 59% faster at this resolution. In Middle-earth Shadow of War now, we don't see as big of a performance jump for the 3070, but at 1440p it is still 44% faster than the RTX 2070. Instantly, it is also 7% slower than the RTX 2080 Ti, which is the biggest marginal difference between the two GPUs across all of our testing today. At 4K, the 3070 does catch up a little bit when compared to the 2080 Ti, but it is still 5% slower. Compared to the 2070, the Ampere GPU is 46% faster. Funnily enough, Red Dead Redemption 2 is actually pretty similar to Shadow of War in terms of the overall performance trends. At 1440p, the RTX 3070 is 49% faster than the RTX 2070, but 5% slower than the RTX 2080 Ti. At 4K, it is still 5% slower than the 2080 Ti, but its lead over the RTX 2070 does rise a little bit to 51% when looking at the average frame rates. Our penultimate game of today is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and this sees the RTX 3070 average over 100 frames per second at 1440p. This puts it 58% ahead of the RTX 2070, while it is a dead heat with the RTX 2080 Ti. There's nothing to split between the 3070 and 2080 Ti at 4K either, as both record identical frame rates. Compared to the 2070, the Ampere GPU is still 58% faster at this resolution. Finally, we come to Total War Saga Troy. The gains for the 3070 when compared to the 2070 are a little bit below average here, with a 42% lead for the 3070 when testing at 1440p. This is also 6% slower than the RTX 2080 Ti. Lastly, at 4K, the 3070 outperforms the 2070 by 47%. It does also close the gap on the 2080 Ti to 4%, which is just 2 FPS. So that is it for the game by game analysis, And now we'll just go over the big picture trends. The first thing I want to talk about is, like Nvidia claimed, the RTX 3070 when compared to the 2080 Ti. As we saw, it wins in some games and then loses in others. But even then, its biggest margin of defeat was just 7%, while it was also no more than 5% faster than the 2080 Ti, so there's really not a lot between these two GPUs. In fact, averaged across all of our games at both 1440p and 4K, we do see the RTX 3070 is on average 2% slower than the 2080 Ti. It's close enough where I would call the performance essentially identical, but it is also worth pointing in mind that we are comparing the 3070 Founders Edition to the 2080 Ti Founders Edition, and for the 2080 Ti, the Founders Edition was actually a factory overclocked model, so it's likely when we review custom 3070s from the likes of Asus and Gigabyte, we will see that gap close further. The other main comparison is going to be 3070 up against the 2070, and here the results are definitely a lot more decisive. At 1440p, for instance, we can see the Ampere GPU is on average 52% faster, and that rises to 56% faster when looking at 4K data. It is certainly a significant jump forward. When looking at those average frame rates, I do think they raise the question as to whether the 3070 is a 1440p GPU or a 4K GPU. For me personally, I think it's going to give us the best experience at 1440p ultra settings, where you will be pushing almost always above 100 FPS. It can do 4K gaming just like the 2080 Ti can, but it's not going to be always locked at 60 FPS. Easier to run games like Death Stranding or Far Cry New Dawn, we are going to see above 60 FPS at all times, but then on the other hand we have games like Control or Gears 5, where we saw average frame rates below 60 FPS, and the 1% lows are going to be even choppier. So for me, it is best for 1440p gaming. We have also used this average frame rate data to calculate the cost per frame analysis, and here we are looking at the 1440p data. As expected, the RTX 3070 tops the chart, offering the best value, though it isn't miles ahead of the RTX 3080. At 1440p, each frame costs £4.42, and that's 9% cheaper than the RTX 3080. Compared to the 2070 though, each frame is 33% cheaper. And then, up against the 2080 Ti, the 3070 is offering essentially the same performance, but reducing the cost per frame by 56%. So it is a significantly better value GPU than last generation's flagship. Of course, we do also have ray tracing to factor into the equation. So here we're going to revisit a few of our games, but this time we tested them with the ray traced quality set to its maximum settings. Starting first with Control then, there's honestly not a whole lot to say here, as the overall performance trends don't really change when turning RTX on. We can see that the RTX 3070 is still pretty much neck and neck with the 2080 Ti, and at 1440p, it outperforms the RTX 2070 by 63% with ray tracing enabled. It's more of the same in Metro Exodus as well. With ray tracing quality set to Ultra, there's basically nothing to split the 3070 and the 2080 Ti. Considering the 3070 is the fractionally slower GPU in this game when RTX is off, this does mean its relative performance is a touch higher when RTX is turned on, but really not by much at all. Lastly, we also look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider with ray trace shadows at ultra quality. In this game, there's no difference between the 2080 Ti or the 3070, whether ray tracing is enabled or disabled. Performance between the two GPUs is simply identical, regardless of the settings we are using. Next up, we also have a handful of productivity benchmarks. This is something we first included with the RTX 3090, and we did see a few positive comments, so we thought we might as well include them for the 3070. Starting off with Blender then, rendering performance is strong for the RTX 3070. Using CUDA, it offers a huge 39% reduction in total render times when compared to the RTX 2080 Ti, though it does take 26% longer than the RTX 3080. If we use optics instead of CUDA as well, we can see the RTX 3070 reduce the total render time by 35% compared to the 2080 Ti. We also look at Octane, where render performance for the 3070 with RTX off is bang in line with the RTX 2080 Ti. There's basically no difference. The RTX 3070 does pull ahead when enabling RTX though, with its score increasing by 16%. Next up, we look at SpecViewPerf 13, and for the three tests we look at, the 3070 trends slightly behind the RTX 2080 Ti. It's 5% slower in 3ds Max 06 and 16% slower in Creo 02. Finally, CATIA 05 sees effectively no difference between the two GPUs. For our final productivity benchmark, we look at V-Ray. Here, the RTX 3070 delivers a render score of 462, and that is an improvement of 27% compared to the RTX 2080 Ti. So then, that is it for our performance benchmarks, but we're now going to move on to look at the 3070 Founders Edition itself. Clearly, Nvidia has tweaked the design as we now have those two fans in their more traditional position, where the 3080 had one fan on the underside and one fan on the top side. Nvidia has also made the 3070 a fair bit smaller, as it's actually about 40mm shorter than the RTX 3080. With that in mind, let's see just how well it deals with the GA104 GPU. Starting then with clock speed. The overall frequency of the RTX 3070 Founders Edition is very healthy, and it's about as stable as we'd expect from a modern Nvidia GPU. This means the frequency starts off high, peaking at 1950 MHz, but it settles down after about 3 to 4 minutes as the temperature starts to increase. Then it spends the remainder of the stress test at just below 1900 MHz, with the occasional spike up to 1920 MHz. Taken across the 30-minute run, the GPU averaged 1885 MHz, which is well above the rated boost clock of 1725 MHz. Thermally, the 3070 Founders Edition is also a definite success. Across that 30-minute stress test, we saw a peak temperature of just 72 degrees and a steady state result of 71 degrees. This means the GPU is actually cooler than the 3080 Founders Edition, despite its smaller heatsink and adjusted fan configuration. Although of course we do have to factor in that the total graphics power is lower for the 3070. Still, it will be fascinating to see how solutions from Nvidia's partners like MSI, Gigabyte and Asus will improve on these results. So we've established that the 3070 Founders Edition does indeed run cool under load. But how about noise levels? Well, we measured noise output coming in at 38 decibels, and that was with the fan spinning at 48% or 1700 RPM under load. While this may not be as class leading as some of the aftermarket cards we have reviewed, it is still an excellent result. It's overall very easy on the ears, and simply put, it is not bothersome at all while gaming. Moving on though, we'll also look at power draw, and here we measured total system power draw at 330 watts during our stress test, which is essentially on par with the GTX 1080 Ti and only a touch ahead of the 2070 Super. Compared to the RTX 2070 non-Super, it's about 40 watts higher. We'll get a more accurate picture though when looking at GPU only power draw, and here we see average power draw come in at 216 watts for the 3070, so that is pretty much bang on its rated 220 watt value. This works out as a 4 watt increase over the 2070 Super and a 42 watt increase over the 2070. Crucially though, it is actually a reduction of 42 watts compared to the 2080 Ti, despite offering essentially identical gaming performance. Using the GPU only power draw data, we can also work out performance per watt, where the RTX 3070 sets a new standard for performance efficiency, delivering 0.28 FPS per watt. This may not be miles ahead of the RTX 3080 Founders Edition or even Gigabyte's RTX 3090 Eagle OC, but it does offer 16% higher FPS per watt than the 2080 Ti. Compared to the RTX 2070, that number increases to 27%. That data certainly shows the 3070 is the most power efficient GPU we have ever tested, and while it may not be as big a leap forward as going from Maxwell to Pascal, it is still a step in the right direction for Nvidia. Lastly, the final area I'm going to talk about is manual overclocking. So far, I think it's safe to say that both the 3080 and 3090 have been a bit disappointing in this area with not really much overclocking headroom at all. Thankfully, I am pleased to say that the 3070 though does appear to have a fair bit more headroom, as I did have some decent success. First of all, the 3070 Founders Edition can increase the power limit to 109%, which gives it an extra 20 watts. With that extra headroom, I was able to add another 115 MHz to the GPU core, while Samsung's G6 memory also overclocked really well. I was able to add another 1100 MHz to that memory, resulting in total speeds of 16.2 gigabits per second. That's definitely more than I've achieved on any 3080 or 3090s so far, and it showed in the games. Across the games we retested, in Gears 5 we saw an average improvement of 9%, and then in both Ghost Recon Breakpoint as well as Total War Saga Troy, we actually saw average FPS increase by 11%. For any RTX 3070 user out there, I would definitely recommend seeing what you can achieve with your 3070. It also means that when overclocked to the limit, a 3070 should outperform a 2080 Ti in pretty much every scenario. Overall then, I think there is simply no denying that the RTX 3070 is another highly successful GPU from Nvidia. It's effectively as fast as last generation's flagship, the RTX 2080 Ti, but at less than half the price. Compared to the RTX 2070 as well, it is over 50% faster for both 1440p and 4K gaming. Granted, those gains for the 3070 compared to the 2070 may not be as large as going from the 2080 to the 3080, but I think they're still very significant. And furthermore, the 3070 actually offers better value than the 3080 in terms of its cost per frame, and that's true at either 1440p or 4K. For me personally, I think the 3070 is going to be best suited to high refresh rate 1440p gaming, as while it can do 4K in a lot of games out there, it's not going to deliver a locked 60 FPS experience like the 3080 can, and Nvidia certainly isn't marketing the 3070 as a 4K GPU like it is with the 3080. Additionally, I also think the VRAM allocation makes most sense for 1440p gaming. 8GB of G6 is currently fine for 1440p ultra settings gaming, though at 4K we are starting to see one or two titles eat more than that. We can always ask for more VRAM on any given graphics card, but at the end of the day I think it's just a balancing act between cost and actual benefit to the gamers out there. So as to whether or not you should actually go out and buy one of these GPUs, particularly on launch day, if it were my money I'd have to say I'd wait and see what AMD has up its sleeve with RDNA 2. At the time this video goes live, the RDNA 2 announcement is going to be tomorrow, and surely AMD is going to be announcing something that's going to compete with the 3070 around this price point. Regardless of what AMD has though, the RTX 3070 is undoubtedly a very strong GPU at £469. AMD is definitely going to have its work cut out trying to match the cost per frame value offered by this new Ampere GPU, but I guess that's what competition is all about, as at the end of the day, it's the gamers who end up benefiting most. That is going to do it for this review though guys, so if you liked it, toss me a thumbs up, let me know your thoughts down below as well. If you are going to buy one of these GPUs on launch day, I would love to hear from you. While you're there, why not check out our Discord, which is linked in the description below, and there you can also consider backing us on Patreon, where you can get access to some exclusive giveaways and also see some of our content early. Stay tuned for more Ampere graphics cards coming very soon though guys, but until then, I've been Dominic for Kit Guru, and I'll see you in the next video.